Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, October 4th, 2023. Time for another show. We're allowed to do that here because I have not had my office vacated by a vote of anybody. So we get to continue. Unfortunately, there's no news to cover for today, so we just might as well pack it in. I don't know, Greg, what you have in mind to discuss, but nothing actually happened yesterday, and there's nothing to discuss. It was the first day with no news in a long time that I can remember. And I don't really know how we will occupy our time, but we'll probably find something. Unless, of course, we're thrown out of office in the middle of our attempt to find something. Lots, of course, circulating about yesterday's events. I did actually get to watch that one on TV, although not very closely. I didn't watch any of the debate because, well, that was ridiculous. But I did manage to turn on C-SPAN in the background and leave it on such that I finally was able to wander by when they actually started voting. And I was a little bit surprised by the fact that they decided to go with a live roll call vote. Although, I mean, I was wondering whether they thought they needed to do that because this had to do with the election kind of the speaker. And normally when they're electing a speaker, you have to stand up there and they do the live roll call alphabetically of the entire house, and everybody stands one at a time and shouts out the name that they're voting for, which is a thing that they do. I mean, it's part of the pomp and circumstance of the first day of a new Congress, typically when, or occasionally when they need to replace a speaker for other reasons. But in the modern practice, generally speaking, it's at that point, right at the beginning of a new Congress. And because they were, I guess, potentially ousting and then going to later maybe replace the speaker, I don't know. There's nothing in the rules that says you have to do that. But there is a rule that allows that to be an option at the direction of the speaker or the chair or whoever's conducting debate. And of course, remember that you're conducting debate in the committee of the whole House on the State of the Union. Then the person in control is the chairperson. But otherwise, operating as the House, it's the Speaker or Speaker pro tem, who's always addressed as Mr. Speaker regardless. That brings us to another issue later on. Once they figured out what they were going to do with McCarthy, they had to figure out what were they going to do going forward, who was going to administer the House, preside over the House. But we actually got that answer ahead of time that on Monday, I think, when Greg let us know that, oh, yes, well, there is a special provision for this, which allows for the speaker to designate an acting speaker pro tem from a list of people as a continuity of government sort of thing, kind of. Well, it's really not continuity of government. It's continuity of the House, at any rate. And Patrick McHenry drew the honors for that, which was an interesting choice. It is interesting, especially as he's now viewed as a sort of elder statesman governing moderate of sorts, when he, in fact, was the Freedom Caucus of his day and was a major pain in the ass for everybody for quite a number of years. And he's just been outstripped in his radicalism by the current Freedom Caucus and MAGA-type members. So he's viewed as an old hand and a moderate at this point, when in fact he's a flaming a-hole is basically what it comes down to. And that's the way you should remember him, despite the fact that he has gotten himself a bow tie and joined the bow tie caucus so that he would look like a pleasant, mild-mannered sort of guy. And he handled himself fairly well. I mean, he appeared calm in his demeanor when he did take over as acting Speaker pro tem, which I didn't even realize that there was such a thing as there's just a Speaker pro tem. But I guess when there's no speaker, the people that he appoints to preside over debate aren't speakers pro tem because there's no speaker and you can't substitute for something that there isn't, I guess. So they're now acting speakers pro tem. And of course, oh yes, well, my full screen of Skype that I can't get rid of is now blocking out my soundboard so that I couldn't easily access my acting sound effects. Well, anyway, lots to get through in all this. It was exciting to see the names called one by one and make the vote last an hour. That was super thrilling. And now there's no Speaker of the House, but there is a Speaker of Connecticut, and it's Greg Dworkin. Here he is. Good morning, Greg. How you doing?
Good morning. I forget who said it. I think it was Josh Chafez, but I want to give proper credit.
Okay.
Who said that, listen, what happens is whenever you turn up the bass, you blow out your speakers.
Yes, that was a good one. I did manage to see that. Was widely shared yesterday. An excellent reaction to all of this. And
so
wow,
I had the sound on.
What else can you
and
do?
What they were yelling is yay and nay. They weren't yelling out people's names because there was only one name, of course.
Right.
And so
They were yelling out
was,
the names
it was
of the
fun
voters.
because even then, sometimes the difference between yay and nay is lost
Yay.
in the acoustics.
Yay.
And so,
Yeah,
I'm
right.
a no. Come on. You put me down as a yes, I'm a no.
Yeah, it happens occasionally. It's not a great system, and
You can say yay or no, and
you
that's
can say
clear.
whatever you want.
But if they insist on saying nay, you're not going to get heard properly.
yeah. So a lot of them were just saying yes or no, and on the screen on C-SPAN they just listed it as yes or no. And but the clerk, sticking with protocol, would repeat your vote back to you as either yay or nay, usually correctly. I think they got it wrong for at least one one of the voters, Bishop.
Right, exactly. Who was one of the key votes, and that's why,
Yeah.
it was noticeable. So, it's welcome to Process in the Morning with David Waldman.
Hey.
The whole thing that happened was just so interesting. Once the resolution to vacate the chair was made, the Speaker has 48 hours to deal with it.
Yes.
He decided, I don't need 48 hours.
Let's do it right now.
I don't know
Let's
what's
go.
going on. I don't know how this works. Let's just do it. Bring it on, he said. That was a quote. Bring it on. So they brought it on. He had no plan. And, the whole thing about how he fell was a combination of Matt Gaetz and the people who voted to get rid of him, who I would respectfully point out to my colleague here on Process in the Morning, included Nancy Mace, as predicted.
That's right, as you predicted.
Because she's
yeah.
really a radical,
Well, it was real
disguised as a moderate.
interesting. Did you see her press availability afterwards?
No,
I
she
happened to see
probably
that.
said,
I'll
well,
talk
I
to you
did it
about
for
it.
different reasons than
Yes,
everybody else.
yes, exactly. That is exactly
I'm
right. You know
Kirsten
Nancy Mace
Sinema
quite
of
well.
the House.
Yeah. She did it, of course, for super liberal reasons, as it turns out. So
And
there
that
you
makes
go.
her moderate.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was wondering what she would do, and I just, I thought she would kind of look for a place to not stand out, but no, she went to the place where she did stand out, then had a press conference and said, I did it because I'm such a liberal feminist. I did it because he's
Speaking of
not
liberal
helping us
feminists,
protect the right to
arguably,
abortion.
you know who was the biggest loser yesterday after Kevin McCarthy?
Bow ties.
His
I think.
sidekick, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yes, okay, I agree with that. I did say as
She
much
hooked her
yesterday.
star
That's
to
hilarious.
McCarthy.
Right.
She broke with the Freedom Caucus. They were mad at her. She argued with Lauren Boebert and a whole bunch of other people.
Yeah.
And now she has nothing.
Pretty
and
much.
after her, probably the third biggest loser is Elaine Stefanik, who gave up everything in regard to principle in order to get nothing.
Yeah. Well, they saw an elevator to the top because he was occupying the top position. He figured they'd hitch their wagons there to that star, and then they realized, oh, the star is Kevin McCarthy, so that's not going to be good. Yeah,
I
she
thought
lost
that
a
the
lot.
Democrats would vote present and make the Republicans do what they did. But in fact, they voted no and made the Republicans do what they did.
I
Same
was a little
difference.
surprised by that. Right up until the end of the show yesterday, talking with Joan. Joan was, of course, saying, well, don't, discount it. It could happen. That's 11 o'clock, and the vote was scheduled for 1 o'clock. And I was just pointing out, we haven't heard anything from the Democratic caucus here. And it seems to me that, well, we hadn't.
That morning, we heard that they were really ticked off at McCarthy.
Yes, I
for
had
what
heard
he
that.
did on Sunday.
But there was no word. I mean, the only way to make it really work would be if they all decided, well, this is what we're going to do as a caucus, and they hadn't yet to that point. While we were on the show, it was hard to tell.
Correct.
Whether they had said any such thing. And
technically correct, but here's what happened
they said,
during that 9:30 to 11 o'clock hour.
Okay.
At 9:30,
I was fooling around doing nothing.
You were fooling around talking to Joan while I was listening to the gossip.
Uh-huh.
So at 9:30, the caucus met.
Okay.
And it was a closed caucus, no phones allowed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So at 9:31, stuff starts leaking out of what happened at the caucus. And right away, they start giving a litany of all the bad things that McCarthy did, starting with the replaying of the video of him on CBS telling Margaret Brennan that it was the Democrats that closed the House down and they're horrible and they have no respect for the institution. Mm-hmm. And that just got everybody ticked off. And so everybody, person after person, and the people who were reporting this were naming names. This person said, I'm never doing it. That person said, I'm never doing it. Then there was a break, and Jayapal came out and said, they need to wallow in their own pigsty. Okay. And so that was about 10 o'clock. And so from that point onward, it was pretty clear they weren't going to save him.
Well, I was waiting for I figured there would be some sort of major statement and that they would have announced it before the start of the day.
And Pelosi made it.
And they didn't do it before 9, so therefore it doesn't count.
No, they didn't do it before 9. So
no, I'm sorry.
Somewhere
it has
right
to be
before
on my
the
desk
vote,
at 9 o'clock.
Nancy Pelosi said there was no reason for us to do anything to get the Republicans out of their own mess. The House will be in order. She said it from San Francisco because she was there for Dianne Feinstein's funeral.
Yes, right. That's
which is important for a couple of reasons. First of all, she wasn't part of the vote.
Right.
And second of all, after McCarthy got tossed out on his can, he immediately took revenge by getting rid of whatever small office she still had left as a ceremonial thing. And then McHenry did the same thing with Steny Hoyer. So that, was like, let's play petty high school politics.
Oh, really?
Which is important because, as Pelosi said, I don't really care about the space. But if this is what the Republicans think is important, perhaps they should turn to getting the important stuff for the country done. I mean,
that never works.
The Republicans are just really furious this morning, and they were furious yesterday, and they're just a furious party. And, of course, they can't blame themselves, so they were trying to figure out how to blame Democrats. McCarthy started it on Sunday, which is part of the reason why he lost the speakership.
Right.
And McCarthy and McHenry continued it yesterday by essentially retaliating against Democrats in the most petty possible way to deflect the fact that they're mad at themselves and they can't take responsibility for what they did.
Yeah, not surprising. So there you go. Senior moderate diplomat Patrick McHenry. The same, bratty jerk we always thought he was back in the early 2000s.
And I don't know if you saw it when he had his very brief stint as acting Speaker pro tem.
I did.
He basically said the House is in recess and then banged the gavel so hard I thought it was going to break in half.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that. He was handling himself, reasonably well, and then he kind of just decided to smash the gavel and really gave away. I thought it was
He smashed it. Absolutely, good description. And it was so loud I could hear it from here. I mean, he was really mad.
It was weird.
So McCarthy gets tossed out. We'll have a lot more to talk about that. And then Patrick McHenry is the acting Speaker pro tem. Yes. Why is that important? Because acting speakers are not constitutional officers.
Right.
And that means he is not in the line of succession.
That's right. Yeah, I saw people wondering about that yesterday.
It's Biden, and then Harris, and then, for those of you who are unaware, Patty Murray, because she is Senate President pro tem.
Right. Yeah, so they skip right over him. He's no worries about that. I did see people puzzling over it, but, he's no more Speaker of the House than anybody appointed Speaker pro tem to oversee, 1-minute speeches at the beginning of a session is the Speaker.
This is where it gets to be an interesting process question. Acting speakers, if the House lets them, and the Republicans still are in the majority. Except for the constitutional parts. I mean, he can't swear people in, and he can't be president if something happens. But other than that, he can do anything a speaker can do, because what do speakers do? The problem is that the last speaker gave away the Speakers Committee. That's the real problem.
Yes.
And so
they
the question
stuck by
is
him,
how he's going to function. But, you know, he can do whatever a regular speaker does, because, like, what the hell do regular speakers do anyway?
Yeah, well, they make, the one thing, they have the right to assign rooms and real estate in the Capitol, so he's already exercised that one.
Right, for example.
But yeah,
so,
that's a
there's a Twitter account that I've recently followed, along with people like Ringwest and Matt Glassman, who are process people. And in fact, this one is called the Process Party. That's the name of the Twitter account. And this one says, and I think it's a he, if McHenry stays on for a while, it'd be an interesting real-time experiment in a decentralized House. The House has needed, for a fair number of decades now, a speaker who can say, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. No recent speaker has been able to say this because so much power has been concentrated in the speakership. It's a basic assumption of all modern political analysis and commentary that the speaker controls the House, and the way for the House to work is for an omnipotent speaker to push through legislation. But no such assumption exists for an acting speaker pro tem.
Okay.
So McHenry has the luxury of saying, I'm not the speaker, I can't do that, and that's what he could say to the radicals.
Okay,
now,
yes.
Whether any of that's technically true is besides the point. It makes him unblackmailable, because what are you going to threaten him with?
Okay.
There's no point in taking him hostage because he can't give you what you want.
Yeah.
Matt Gaetz is going to rant about a temporary acting speaker pro tem not using his authority to ensure legislative outcomes. What authority? Without a speaker, responsibility and accountability are dispersed. That means members have to be accountable. That's good. That's his argument.
Okay.
And I said, okay, well, but, the problem is that the speaker already gave the Speakers Committee away, so how does any of this get done?
Yeah.
And to that response, he said, well, you don't really need the Rules Committee to get stuff on the floor. Well, I suppose it's technically true, but from a practical point of view, you do.
You don't need them to get it on the floor. You just need them so that you know what's going to happen once it gets there.
Right. Nobody's going to throw something out there where there's unlimited amounts of debate and the minority party gets to do whatever amendments they want. That's not how the House works.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, weird. But, the basic point is maybe some good will come of this, by not having everything focused on the speaker. And it's not like they were getting a whole lot done anyway. And most of the stuff that they want to pass is ceremonial. So in this particular setting, maybe there's a point to be made there.
Okay. Well, there's lots. I'm sure we'll find out what other
Kagro
mischief there is.
Sounds skeptical.
I am. I'm skeptical of anything involving Patrick McHenry in any way, shape,
and
or
we
form.
should. And again, it's
thinking
a reminder,
back
somebody
about
was sending around the Young Guns book.
Oh, yes.
Right, so you could see Kevin McCarthy to the right, and in the center was Eric Cantor, and over on the left there was Paul Ryan.
Who? What? Yeah, right.
And they're all gone.
They certainly are.
Right, and the funny thing is, Ryan was Speaker. He didn't want to be. He didn't want the job. They sort of convinced him, but he didn't want the job. Eric Cantor's gone before getting the job. He really wanted the job.
He thought so.
And Kevin McCarthy, obviously, we know about Kevin McCarthy. But of the three of them, nobody would have picked him to be the Speaker of the three.
True.
And there he is, and he did a terrible job like everybody thought he would. And now he's gone. Stuart Rothenberg pointed out, I will always remember how McCarthy first blamed Trump for January 6th and then sucked up to him.
Yes, that is a good memory.
And, to which I said, the roots of Democratic discontent with McCarthy start right here.
Yeah.
And people pointed that Sunday
January
thing
6th,
and said, look what he says. That's not the point. I don't know if you were aware of this, but Republicans and Democrats in the House do not like each other very much. And a lot of that has to do
people say that
with what happened on January 6th, where those people were in the room and they know what happened. And Democrats looked at Republicans trying to make excuses for Trump and saying, what are you doing? Yeah. And that is unforgivable. And will never be forgiven. And that's part of the reason why there was some mistrust with McCarthy to begin with.
Yes.
And then he just made things worse and worse and worse. I'll give you an example. He went around telling people after he lost that I'm shocked I lost. Nancy Pelosi promised that she would back me at the time I became Speaker. I'm sure that she said something institutional about this. But on the other hand, as somebody else pointed out, think of this in context. Okay?
All right.
Here is Kevin McCarthy trying on the 15th ballot to become Speaker by promising the radicals anything they want, and then turning around and trying to get Nancy Pelosi to back him while he's doing this. Yeah. And then ask the question, how come nobody trusted McCarthy?
Yeah.
And the answer is because he's a snake.
Well, yes. I was surprised how many people had things to say about, well, relatively minor complaints. I mean, they're major complaints, but compared to like, well, he flipped on January 6th. Well, he went back on his word with this, that, or the other legislative deal. And I was, this is all true, and that's going to be top of mind for you.
I'll give you an example of exactly what you're talking about.
Okay,
you're absolutely right. This is Harry Litman.
Hey, all right, awesome.
Democratic reasons for not bailing McCarthy out. He voted to overturn election results after January 6th. And that's an even underplaying of what happened, because it was really Trump did it. Oh, Trump didn't do it. It's the Democrats' fault.
Yeah, I'm going to be murdered. Please help me, Trump. Trump turns on him, and then he says, you know what? The way to do this is to join.
Go to Mar-a-Lago and kiss the ring.
Yeah.
So there's that. Number 2, reneged on debt limit deal he had brokered with Biden. Number 3, friend relationship with Trump. And number 4, opened to Biden impeachment inquiry with no evidence of wrongdoing. But it all goes back to January 6th. That is so much bigger than any of the other things.
Yep. I was surprised how few people not only remembered the January 6th thing or made that their top item, but how many people were like, oh, yeah, he did say that, remembering the conversation, the screaming match allegedly between him and Trump on the phone. And wasn't it maybe even Nancy Mace's phone?
Right.
Now that I think about it. And the whole, well, Kevin, I guess these people care more about the election than you do. Like,
right. Here's another. This is Matthew
answer.
Green, who is a Catholic University political scientist, also on Twitter, who wrote yesterday, I expected McCarthy to survive today's efforts to remove him as Speaker. Some reasons why it was wrong. 1, I underestimated the Democratic caucus's animosity towards McCarthy. Most recently, he publicly blamed them for wanting to shut down the government. And I pointed out, it's January 6th.
Yeah.
Sunday is just like icing on the cake. It's January 6th. Number 2, Democrats were also upset by McCarthy's decision to call for an impeachment. In 2015, I wrote about how minority parties are driven in part by emotion and desire to protect the same party president. I should have consulted my own research. I also didn't appreciate how many Democrats and Republicans viewed McCarthy as untrustworthy. If you don't keep your word as leader, the consequences can be severe. It's one of the things that damaged Speaker Jim Wright. All of this trumped the risk for Democrats that McCarthy might be replaced by somebody worse. And I assume Democrats wouldn't want to set a precedent of the minority joining a majority faction to remove a speaker. But they've likely decided to change the rules when they can, so this sort of thing can't happen again, which is to say the motion to vacate by one person thing is going to go out the window.
I mean, you would think, but I don't know that it really has anything to do with the Democrats' feelings about it.
Yeah, but, they hate him.
Yes, that's true.
And after
he
slapped them in the face on Sunday, all it did is remind them of January 6th, and then that was it. And that's what happened in the caucus.
I mean, this is a waste of time.
So then he turns around and says, well, the only reason I'm not here is because Democrats.
Yeah. Well, no.
Which he said in his valedictory speech there as he was leaving.
Listen, Democrats don't vote for Republicans for Speaker.
Right.
That's it. It's not even animosity. It's just that's what you do.
And I think it was Armando, but it could have been somebody else who said, you know what? Remember when there were 15 ballots for Speaker?
I do remember this. It was this year.
Yeah? Yeah. And do you remember how many of those ballots had Democrats voting for McCarthy?
Yeah, exactly.
None of them.
Right.
Because that's how it works. That would be like the minority party voting for a rule.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. It's done by
even when it's good.
It's normal. And then to say, well, the whole problem was that this happened, when in fact it's the complete and total norm in Washington, is brain-dead reporters trying to blame Democrats for the Republicans' problem. And why are they doing that? Because Republicans told them that.
This is well, I don't know. How astonishing is the mistake I was going to say, this is an astonishing mistake for a political scientist. No, it isn't. It's an astonishing mistake. But I guess I shouldn't be any more surprised that a political scientist would make it. I don't know what the rest of his background is, but I mean, I assume somewhere there are political science professors who worked on Capitol Hill once.
Yeah.
But not always. You do the right academic work, you can make it work. But, I mean, I don't know. The whole premise when he said, well, I underestimated the animosity. Well, first of all, forget the animosity. You don't need to know anything about the animosity. This is a vote for who's going to be speaker. Democrats don't vote for Republicans for speaker and vice versa. That's part one. Now, they also personally hated him, and you could have said, and this was my concern yesterday, was that before we figured out what was actually going to happen, Democrats would say, well, it's not that we don't want to vote against a Republican for speaker. It's a matter of, well, we're nervous. That's Democrats. We wring our hands about it. We don't know the devil you know better than the devil you don't, et cetera, et cetera. Et cetera, et cetera. I thought they were going to possibly go with that. But there was the idea that anyone would underestimate the interest of Democrats in not having a Republican speaker.
This particular Republican who they didn't trust.
True. But that's the second act to all of this. The first thing is there's really no reason to believe that Democrats are going to do anything to save a Republican speaker. That's
right. You vote
the
against
Republican speaker's job.
You remember Sean Trendy, the conservative analyst for Real Clear Politics. So I wrote on Twitter yesterday, I don't think that Republicans and Democrats in the House like each other. And he wrote back and said, okay, I had to laugh out loud at that one.
I mean,
they despise each other.
Yeah, well, it's just
they loathe each other.
It's a particularly bad time.
Getting worse since January.
That's true. But they never, even when they didn't loathe it, back in the day when Tip O'Neill, you know what? You know how many Democrats voted for Republicans for speaker back in the day with Tip O'Neill? It was also zero. And you could easily have said there was not nearly as much animosity. But when it comes to a vote like that, you know what they're going to do. So, I don't know. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We're still on Netroots Radio. Nobody's voted us out of it. As we were heading into the break, I was expressing my astonishment that anybody would not understand the depths of the animosity between the parties and just the tradition of how speaker voting goes. But I did say on the way out, like, well, how could you not know what they were going to do? Well, of course, yesterday we didn't know what they were going to do, so it was easier yesterday to not know what they were going to do. But I figured, at the minimum, the idea that large numbers of Democrats would say, yes, it's actually best that Kevin McCarthy has done an admirable job and we need to keep him. That was not going to happen. And you should know that going into your analysis if you're a political science professor. But yeah, and when it comes to voting for what to do about speaker, there's not going to be a great deal, no reason ever, and no tradition of support from the other party. The only thing that had me questioning what the outcome would be was there a group of moderate to conservative-ish, in terms of Democrats, moderate to conservative Democrats who might wring their hands over everything and say, I just don't know where they're going to go with this. I don't know who's going to end up being speaker. This guy, though terrible, and I have 100 reasons to hate him, it's maybe better to keep an ineffectual speaker in place, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just, I thought that there was a real possibility that the Democratic leadership was going to say, no recommendation for anybody. Do what you want to do. We're not going to affect the outcome no matter what, especially if we're not united in all of this necessarily.
And that would be to vote present. That would be how you would do that in practice.
There might even be some Democrats who would say, I'm going to vote no on removing him because I don't think it's good for Democrats. You would be at odds with the majority of the party, but go ahead and do it. The biggest surprise to me was that they organized as a caucus and put out a position and everybody stuck to it.
Including Jared Golden.
I didn't think that they were going to ask their members to do that. And then I thought if they did, Phillips. They wouldn't get it. You
got everybody to stick to it.
So that was the big surprise for me, not the animosity between the parties. I don't know how you say that and then say, yes, I am practicing in political science.
I'm shocked to find out they don't like each other.
Yeah. Well, they don't. So anyway, yeah, there was a lot of...
I'm shocked to find out they have different positions on issues.
I don't know.
Shocking.
Surprising to me. Yes, and the other big surprise of the day was the idea that Patrick McHenry has transformed himself into a moderate, but I think it's by having been bypassed in his craziness. He's outmoded and just running old school crazy 2.0. And, these guys in Matt Gaetz and the Freedom Caucus are like the, 5G crazy.
Yeah. Well, at the same time, the Problem Solvers Caucus met.
They did. Was there a problem?
Republicans on the Problem Solvers Caucus were very angry with the Democrats on the Problem Solvers Caucus because Democrats didn't save McCarthy. So the Republicans on the Problem Solvers Caucus said that they might walk out of the Problem Solvers Caucus en masse, to which I and many other people said, good, problem solved.
What a moderate thing to do.
Yeah,
to walk out of the Problem Solvers Caucus.
So, Nancy Mace gets exposed. Problem Solvers Caucus has issues. McCarthy's gone. It's a very interesting day in Washington.
It certainly was.
And guess who handled it fairly well in terms of reporting? Why the state-old New York Times? Had an excellent article. Let me read to you some of it. McCarthy's extraordinary downfall reflects an ungovernable GOP is the headline. So start right there. That's pretty good.
Okay.
The subheader. The glib Californian made many promises and paid a price when he was unable to fulfill them, which is to say he lied to everybody. But his demise also reflected the challenge of wielding a Republican majority that refuses to be governed.
Okay. Yes.
His ouster was extraordinary. It unsettled Washington. But here's some other things that they said that I thought were pretty good in that piece. Some Democrats seem legitimately torn over what to do about the push to remove Mr. McCarthy, worried about who would come after him and the likely damage to the institution if speakers can now be discarded so easily. And they certainly weren't happy about aligning themselves with Matt Gaetz.
Right.
But as what do they say about Gaetz? The Florida Republican who led the effort to depose the speaker and a man most Democrats and many Republicans can't stomach.
That is true.
But as they gathered in the Capitol Visitor Center to decide whether to overlook Mr. McCarthy's political sins and back him, they instead ended up reciting a litany of his offenses, an indictment that could have been nailed to the House chamber door. Without Democrat support, with 8 hardcore right-wing Republicans willing to vote against him, Mr. McCarthy stood no chance. For Mr. McCarthy, who practiced a management style of doing and saying pretty much whatever it would take to get through the day, tomorrow finally arrived.
That really sums it up better than anything.
Yeah.
Wow.
He did what speakers are supposed to do, said Representative Tom Cole, and a staunch McCarthy ally. He did the right thing. He did the right thing, I think, for this institution. He showed it could function in a time of crisis. And finally, I think he did the right thing for our party. And then the Times goes on to write, but in today's Republican Party, doing the right thing is considered a transgression, not a virtue, a sign of unforgivable allegiance to the political establishment. That was the central problem for McCarthy and for his eventual successor. House Republicans, beholden to a base that reveres former President Donald Trump and detests compromise, have become ungovernable, and it is doubtful that his precipitous downfall will break the fever. That's pretty good. And actually, it points out that the roots to this problem that McCarthy had go back to January 6th, but the roots of January 6th are Donald Trump. So this was Donald Trump, the chaos agent, as we like to call him.
Yes.
Doing his chaos thing in the House. And, how is that bad for Democrats? Why would Democrats, try to fix this problem in a unilateral fashion? Jayapal's right. This is the Republican pigsty.
Yeah.
And it's up to them to fix it. And as our friend Dana Hull pointed out, people are bemoaning the fact that the Democrats didn't make a deal with McCarthy to save his speakership. McCarthy never offered a deal. McCarthy never came to them. That's McCarthy's fault. That's on McCarthy.
That's true too. I don't know if it would have been wise to accept any deal, but he certainly didn't ask for one.
That's besides the point. The point they're making is that it was in Democrats' best interest to make a deal with McCarthy. Well, I shall remind you of the ancient joke: how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer is one, but the light bulb has to want to change. If McCarthy is and the Republicans are unwilling to deal with Democrats because it's a sin to deal with Democrats, why are you yelling at Democrats?
The whole thing is bizarre, and the fact that would even get repeated by the press without noting, remember,
Gabe Sherman loves to repeat it.
We'll throw out McCarthy because he cooperated with Democrats. Now, can I get a little cooperation from Democrats to throw him out?
I'm shocked I couldn't get cooperation from Democrats.
I mean, they did get cooperation from Democrats this time. All the votes to throw him out were Democratic, plus 10 Republicans. Now, I don't understand why this isn't like the headline that Gates says the sin was working with Democrats on something, and then he went ahead and worked with Democrats on something. So I don't know why that isn't amazing.
Some of the analysis, which is completely speculative, because nobody really knows what Gates was thinking, was that Gates was going to lose. And that the Democrats would protect McCarthy, and then Gates could say, look, the sin is he worked with Democrats. That's what he was looking for. That's what he was trying to set up.
Yes.
That's why he told everybody in advance he thought he'd fail.
Interesting.
And then he didn't fail. So he became the dog that caught the car, and now what?
Yeah, I don't know. And he was fine with it, just not having a plan.
He's fine with it, for a different reason. He was already fundraising it, and et cetera, and he wants to run for governor of Florida anyway.
Yeah.
And, you don't need the party to do what individuals do. But, there's just so much that goes into it. Oh, by the way, people don't talk about this much, but there's another reason why Democrats are perfectly happy to get rid of McCarthy.
Okay. Good.
Who's going to replace him? Well, McHenry can stay there because there's no reason not.
I guess
if you have somebody to replace him with, great. If there's a consensus choice from the Republicans to replace him, then replace him. But if that were the case, McCarthy wouldn't have had 15 votes to get to where he is.
Right.
There is no consensus.
Circumstances may have changed. You never know, but okay. Yes.
And he's the institutional choice.
Right, but
then after that, Tom Emmer, Scalise, and McCarthy don't like each other, but Scalise is still more of an institutionalist than the other guy that's talking about running, Jim Jordan, which a lot of people don't like. Yeah, and people laugh when they say that. They don't have a consensus, and that's why McHenry might stay.
Yes.
But one thing that McCarthy was really good at wasn't counting votes, wasn't policy, wasn't keeping his word. It wasn't, any of the things you'd expect speakers to do to understand how the Rules Committee works and how the floor works and such and such. The one thing he was super duper really good at, raising money. He was one of the most prolific money raisers in the entire history of the House. And number two, Steve Scalise is terrible at it. Why? Because McCarthy loves the stuff that it takes to raise money. He would rather get on a plane and go to a little hotel somewhere and meet with a bunch of donors and glad hand them and backslap them and have a few drinks and be affable and then get on a plane and go somewhere else and do that. He used to do that all the time. He loved that stuff. And a lot of people don't love that stuff.
Yeah,
so
I can
getting rid of
understand
McCarthy,
that.
You're getting rid of the best fundraiser in the House. And you're replacing him with nothing. And that's okay for Democrats. Nobody talks about that.
That is a good point.
That had to be part of the thinking too.
Yeah. Well, if it wasn't, even if it stayed on the back burner, that's fine. It's something you don't talk about until.
Well, how about the
done.
California delegation for the Democrats?
How about
they're looking at each other and saying, we're going to
what?
support and save a guy who's going to turn around and raise money to beat us?
Yeah, you don't have to be from the California delegation for that to be a concern, given how prolific he was. That is interesting, just in terms of,
we talked about all sorts of stuff on the show. We have to mention that too. That may not have been the primary thing, but it was the thing.
It's an excellent point. And even if no one discussed it as a reason to oppose him, it's just a great byproduct. I didn't know Steve Scalise was so terrible at it.
Yep, nobody's.
Well, now he's going to be terrible at it. He's not well. So that's
the gossip sheets that are talking about the list of people who might replace him, they're talking about their the SWOT, SWOT, strength, weakness, opportunity, threat.
All right. Yeah. Okay.
The strength of McCarthy is a fundraiser, and the weakness of Scalise is a fundraiser.
Huh.
And the opportunities are this, and the threats are, all sorts of other stuff.
I wonder if it will make as big of a difference these days now that fundraising can be done by it's sort of an automatic thing. Oh, I don't know. A couple of billionaires will fix it, even if you don't know them very well. They don't care whether they know Steve Scalise.
It matters because not everybody is set up like Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene to take advantage of the small donor stuff. What McCarthy did is he brought in the big donors.
Yeah.
And if you take the big donors out of the Republican Party, I would perfectly be happy to match the
that would be
Democratic
great
Party against them.
I guess I'll caution against banking on that too much. Only by
I'm not saying it'll
that,
happen, but I'm just saying, it matters.
I don't think so. Because I don't know that the billionaires liked Kevin McCarthy very much either. It was just he'll get on the plane and come here. That's
I don't
great.
mind meeting him.
He'll fulfill the role. We say, the Speaker of the House is coming to our fundraiser
before they meet with Matt Gaetz.
Right. But so it's good. He would show up and he'd fulfill the role, but they may be just as happy to say, here's the $1 billion anyway. And
McCarthy is somebody they hire. They don't love him, but that's not the point. The point is he was really good at that, and he was able to get money out of him.
Yeah. I'm just wondering whether the billionaires will now say, well, I don't know, gee whiz, the person collecting the money is really crappy at showing up on the plane rides. I don't care. I'd rather do the shadowy billion. How come I can't just give money at Bohemian Grove with the Cokes and Clarence
But there
Thomas?
you have it. So basically what you've just outlined is how the network gets spoiled.
Oh. Whoops.
Right, we had a whole network set up to do this stuff, and now you want to reinvent the wheel just a few months before the next election.
All right.
You could do it. You'll get your money in there somehow. But it's not the coordinated way that I wanted to do it, where I get to control, for example, who gets to do the primary. Because I'll give you money, but I won't give you that money.
Maybe that's it.
Now I've completely lost control. It's like giving up the Speaker's Committee.
Maybe what they mean by Scalise being bad at fundraising is that you can't say to him, and so this is what I want, and he says, yeah, okay. He might be saying, I don't know, or no, or that's really up to someone else.
I don't think he likes it, and for those two reasons, it's just easier to deal with McCarthy.
Okay, all right. So as a bag man, they'll collect money. It's just, hey, I don't trust your bag man as much as I trusted the other guy. Oh, well, you still have to make the payments. So do it. Yeah, but I don't feel good about it. Or maybe now more of that will go to Matt Gaetz or something. I don't know. Well, it poses an interesting problem. I don't know if it turns off the spigot, but if it unsettles people in advance of
it's a lot
approaching
that's
election,
in the
that's
Republican
good.
Party right now. As part of this whole thing, with Gaetz getting up to speak every 5 minutes because the way that the process happened is that there's this resolution for a motion to vacate, and then there's an hour of discussion.
Yeah.
And each side, that's in scare quotes, gets a half hour of an hour discussion.
Yeah.
And there was no Democratic discussion. None.
Right.
Zero. No Democrats wanted to speak. So one side was pro-McCarthy from Republicans, and the other side was Matt Gaetz.
Yes.
Right? So that meant that Matt Gaetz got to speak in response to whoever the pro-McCarthy people would trot up there, whether it was Scalise or McHenry or whoever, I don't even know. It was hard to pay attention because Tom Cole, the speeches were just so bad. But then Gates would come up and say, "What are you talking about? You guys suck. Your impeachment stuff is a joke.
Oh,
You're a failure. You can't get Biden. You're working with Democrats. You all suck." And then somebody else would come out with some, a foghorn leghorn speech about how great McCarthy was, living up to expectations. Right. And Gates would get up there and say, "What kind of expectations? You have the lowest expectations in the world. If you think that guy beat expectations, you stink."
That was pretty good.
Just look at your impeachment stuff. It's terrible. Yeah. And it was fantastic.
It was amazing because right in the first minute or so of the speechifying, I remembered I forgot that the downside, and I'm sure they discussed this a little bit inside the Democratic caucus, some of the downside of letting this rip, right, and saying, we'll vote to remove him, or at least at the moment, we won't vote to table the motion to proceed or we won't table the resolution to remove him. And will allow debate to go forward. The downside of that is, the time won't be evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats as usually happens. It'll be between a proponent and an opponent of the resolution, and they'll both be Republicans. And the way that they'll deal with that is that they'll say they don't want to Gates is fine airing dirty laundry. The other side isn't going to spend the time attacking Gates. They should and could and wanted to, but their strategy was going to end up being, use the national TV time while everybody's paying attention to bash Biden and Democrats and to try, even if it doesn't make any sense, to make it their fault, or even if you don't try to tie them to what's happening now, just attack them and say that Kevin McCarthy was awesome at attacking them and do that. So it's going to be an hour of Democrat bashing on national television. So that's the downside.
It wasn't because Gates wouldn't let it.
That was the biggest surprise of the whole thing, was that
and
Gates
he got to speak more often than anybody else.
Yes, because he controlled the whole block, and there were only 10 people that were going to vote on his side.
The other 9 didn't want to have anything to do with him.
It was really funny.
Convenience.
So that was the one downside. That I'm sure that came up and said, this is giving Matt Gaetz a half an hour to go crazy on TV, and that's usually bad for Democrats. And I'm sure nobody said,
and what's the downside?
Yeah. Well, nobody said, no, he's actually going to attack Republicans for the bulk of the time. Yeah, I guess that's what the resolution is about. So you would think, but then I guess I would have said, well, he's not going to stick to the topic of the resolution. He's going to go bonkers in every direction. He was the most disciplined guy on the floor.
Yeah.
Because this was his big moment to attack Kevin McCarthy, and he was going to do it. So it was very interesting. And like you said, the most exciting thing is when something is unpredictable.
Look, I mean, if you have no
Kevin McCarthy gave us a lot of that.
Lie and you don't have any boundaries, you're interesting to watch. We've learned that.
Yeah.
Speaking of that concept, here's an interesting reaction from Senator Mitt Romney, asked about the goings-on yesterday. Oh. And he said, one thing it shows us is that President Trump abandoned Kevin McCarthy. He didn't come to his support. Had he come down hard, I presume Gates and others would have had to follow suit.
No.
So he's got a couple of things that he worked into that statement. But he's right. President Trump, although he got the chaos he wanted, he was also powerless to do anything about what was going on. He didn't come to McCarthy's support. He reminded everybody that when push comes to the shove, he's never going to come to your support.
That's certainly clear.
And, Romney also reminds everybody Gates is totally beholden to him, which is why this is happening. If Trump had said, I don't want this to happen, Gates would be powerless.
Maybe. It certainly wouldn't have helped him all that much. But in the days leading up to this, I noticed that, I guess maybe that and the CR that they ended up passing, Trump was pretty ineffectual in all that. Because Trump sent out his message, no, they should vote this thing down and shut the government down, and they didn't even come close.
No, Trump was smart enough to stay out of it, but also at the same time, he was otherwise engaged. If we have any more time on the show, maybe we'll talk about the fact that he was actually in court.
Sure. Go ahead. But he was in court. Yeah.
Getting in trouble, getting himself a gag order for picking on the judge's chief clerk. who is an experienced, you can stay there forever kind of clerk, not a, high school intern. But in the meantime, the Republicans are trying to blame the Democrats for everything that happened.
Yeah.
And some in the media are pushing back against that. I gave you the New York Times. This here from Sahil Kapoor notes that, remember, as if we have forgotten, Nancy Pelosi had an identically small House majority over the last 2 years, and this stuff didn't happen.
Right.
This is not a both sides phenomenon. The two parties are not mirror images of each other. Mm-hmm. He could have added one's a disaster, but you know which one that is. He didn't, but that's about as far as he would go. That's okay. That's correct.
Yes, and there are still some people who are, disaffected and skeptical of some of the Democratic newcomers, whether you refer to them as the squad or not, and we're always upset. And AOC is such a show horse, etc. And it turns out A, not to be true, and B, they had every opportunity to try and create these kinds of problems, but they had their heads screwed on right. And although they never necessarily all threw their lot in with the leadership, they knew what it took to, we all have to conduct ourselves as adults here because we have an effective speaker.
It's not true. Oh, look and see what she's doing. See, she's actually good at this.
Right. I mean, she was doing a good job of it, and they were, look, we have our disagreements, but she's running this place, and she's backed by a huge coalition that have come to a consensus behind her. And, we're going to throw our lot in with these people because they're making things happen. They're passing legislation and getting it enacted into law. That's what we came here to do. We don't get everything we want every time we want it. That's life. Okay. Whereas in the Freedom Caucus, they do the opposite. No. We want everything all the time, no matter from who. And
it can't work. Anyway, this is a chance. You don't get these opportunities very often. People talk about presidential debates not because they change minds, but because it's one of the rare circumstances where something might happen to shake up what otherwise is like in track to do this, that, or something else. Mm-hmm. Yesterday and the day before were days. It was one of those events, if you look at it as a single event, that has a chance to shake Washington up a little bit. It's certainly shaken the Republicans a lot. They didn't see this coming and they were unprepared for it. But it's also shaken up the media because it's really difficult to make this both sides. They're trying. They can't. You really can't make this both sides. So David Simon points out the asymmetrical reality of the GOP's collapse into dysfunction and disinformative theatrics is ignored in favor of an unevidenced claim of overall institutional collapse. It's not so. It's one side. So Sahil Kapoor saw through that and said so. There are other people that are saying that, and they don't usually have the chance to. That New York Times coverage is remarkable only in the sense that the rest of the coverage hasn't been remarkable. And, basically media needs to cover it that way every day, not just yesterday, not just today. And that's really the reality. And Republicans are at least giving them that opening. I can't guarantee you that they're going to do it. But the opening is there. It's right there.
Okay. Well, you can never guarantee anybody's going to take any opportunities. You can lead a horse to water, and then something happens afterwards.
When you get to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah. All right. So make the most of it, America. Oh, by the way, here's news that I missed and shouldn't have. Not to be left out of all of this, Canada has elected a new Speaker of the House of Commons, and they did it just yesterday, like sneaking it in, as almost as though they did it as camouflage, even though it was not a contested. Well, it was contested, but it wasn't nearly the same sort of situation. Canadians are very polite, so they were very happy to elect a new Speaker of the House. How do you like that?
I want that guy from Great Britain. Order! I want that guy.
I don't know how they do it in Canada, but it looks like they were very happy about it. By the way,
the first that guy Speaker.
We have a Republican.
It's a constitutional office, and he's in line for secession. He's not born here, so he can't do
it. Canada's first black Speaker of the House of Commons. How do you like that?
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So I got 1 minute left. Let me read to you Lisa Rubin, Law of Ruby. about the trial. The New York Attorney General's trial has definitely gotten under Trump's skin. That's the important part of this. Mm-hmm. He's far calmer at his arraignment on the 30-plus counts of unlawfully retaining classified documents. Why is he stressing about this? Image. Trump's self-concept and public persona alike rest on his king of all real estate construct. Although the Attorney General has already exposed how much of it is fiction, it's interesting. We talked about this yesterday. There's like 6 counts that are being decided at the trial. The 7th count of who he is has already been decided. He's a fraud. But the other 6 are what he did, and that's why it's under trial right now.
Okay.
But it's more than that. She says the remedies the Attorney General is seeking, which Trump himself acknowledges constitute a sort of corporate death penalty, are the only ones he can't campaign away. If restored to the presidency, he can pardon himself for his alleged federal crimes. He could arguably force the Manhattan and Fulton County DAs, who might not be able to try their cases against him before the election, to stop on the grounds that they're prosecuting a sitting president.
Yes.
But the only way, and that doesn't mean that's true or not true, but he has that argument to make. But the only way out of Tish James' civil suit is through and then appeals. That's because it's taking place right now.
Yes.
And before then,
he's
the
not
court
president.
could impose serious penalties, bars on acquiring New York real estate property, borrowing from any New York registered lender, serving as an officer or director of any New York company, a monitor to direct and correct all financial reporting, and maybe even the liquidation of his properties. And that's before we get to any disgorgement of the profits, which the Attorney General estimates at $250 million, so they want that as penalty. Collectively for Trump, the smorgasbord of potential remedies is worse than any threat of prison to him. Well, I wouldn't say that because he's deathly afraid of prison. He's a germaphobe.
A lot of people are afraid of prison.
Yeah, I mean, this gets to the core of who he is, and it really bothers him. That's how come he's always screaming and yelling and scowling and, doing all the other stuff. And that's how he got himself a gag order yesterday.
All right. Awesome job. Way to conduct your trial. By the way, why is he not arguing in this and every other case that you can't prosecute me? I'm the president of the United States. I won the election.
Because, he's so crazy that he just might do it, and it just might work.
Maybe you'll see it in some of the other ones. Now, that doesn't mean he can't bring a civil trial.
He's going to testify on his own behalf, like his lawyers want him to be anywhere near.
Wow. All right. Very good. I'm looking forward to.
Anything he says can be used against him in any of the other cases, and there's a lot of other cases.
Awesome job. I can't wait for Colonel Jessup to take the stand. This is going to be good. Okay. How about we come back tomorrow unless you're replaced by Republicans, Greg?
Okay.
Okay. Well, no chance of that happening.
Let's vacate the microphone.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We have yet to be dislodged from our position here. No one has any basis on which to vote on it, so the end. So thanks to Ricky for bringing this to our attention that Canada has done this thing. And in typical Canadian fashion, they scheduled it opposite our big drama. Not really. I wonder what they thought of that. That must have been really something. And a Canadian should be patting themselves on the back for this transition, although I don't know why the transition is happening. So Canadians, including Ricky, you are invited to tell me what was going on. Why was there a need for a new speaker? What happened to the old one? Is it just time? Is it something you do at the beginning of October? I don't know. But the basic fact is, yes, and I looked it up just to grab an article about it, and I have intentionally grabbed the Washington Post's article about it, even though, of course, like the first instinct is to say, well, let's go with the Canadian newspaper or the CBC's report on it. But for one thing, they may assume we already know all of the background up in Canada because they know all the background up in Canada. And sometimes the local paper, therefore, is less helpful. So I thought I'd grab something that was designed for American readers. And secondly, I grabbed the Washington Post piece because it would have been too easy to say, oh, we ignored the whole thing and we didn't even report it in our media. But we did report it on media. It was us. We ignored it because there was the big drama going on here. So sort of as proof that local, American media was, in fact, someone was assigned to the job and they did it. We bring you Neha Masis coverage. I hope I'm pronouncing it right, but she's drawn the assignment. I don't know whether she was thrilled to do it. Maybe she's Canadian herself. I don't know. Writing for the Washington Post, Canada elects first black Speaker of the House of Commons. That's the big, the big news here. And the fact that he has a name. And it's Greg Fergus. So in case anybody asks you, and like pub trivia or something, who's the Speaker of the House of Commons in Canada? At least for right now. By the time they ask you this question, that may have changed. I don't know. Not that they expect him to last less time than a head of lettuce or anything, but I don't know how often the speakership changes hands here. So Greg Fergus is Canada's newly elected Speaker of the House, says the caption of the photo for this piece. And he's pictured here with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. Poilievre? How does he say that? How do French people say that is the real question. Here, in the House. And more than that, I am informed by Ricky here that there's some interesting pomp and circumstance that goes with it. When it's a friendly, affair, I guess, or maybe always. Maybe they just never have unfriendly affairs in electing speakers in Canada. But she says it was kind of fascinating to watch. There's a lot of ceremony to it that I didn't realize they did, for example, and this explains the photo. After the name of the new speaker is announced, the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition ceremonially drag the new speaker to the speaker's chair. Very fascinating thing to watch here. It looks like they're all just walking arm in arm, which is a nice photo, but that adds some real context to it. And I wonder does that carry over? Is that English practice as well? You could see where in the past they might have had to drag someone to the chair and force them to preside. So here's the story, as again written up by Nia Masi. I'm guessing at my best guess at pronunciation there. Canada's House of Commons, or Commons, as they may pronounce. I'm just making trouble for myself. Canada's House of Commons voted in Greg Fergus as its first black speaker on Tuesday, following the resignation of the previous speaker. Here we go. Now we need to know this thing. Why did the previous speaker resign? Sounds like a good reason. They invited a Nazi veteran to Parliament. Well, it sounds like that was a mistake. And it cost them the job. Fergus, a member of the Liberal Party representing Hull Aylmer, in Quebec, was elected as the 38th House Speaker in a secret ballot. They do it by secret ballot in the 338-member House, beating 6 other candidates. Describing his new role as a great honor, because it is one, Fergus told House members that he hoped to show people that politics is a noble profession. That would be nice. Fergus, who served as a member of Parliament since 2015, that's not a long time to be made Speaker, but it's a different kind of job there. Also chairs the Black Caucus in Parliament. I don't know whether you have to resign that or not as Speaker. And has held senior advisory roles in a number of ministries. He's the father of 3 adult children. They started out as infants, of course. And has 1 grandson. Wow, he's looking very youthful in his photo, I must say. Besides politics, his interests include running and jazz, and that must explain it. Jazz keeps you young, apparently. Running might also help. Previously, Jean Augustine, Canada's first black woman to be elected. Jean, as I gave that pronunciation to it. She may be just Jean Augustine. I don't know. Gosh, that betrays an awful lot of ignorance, the regular American ignorance of Canada. Nothing worse than usual. Canada's first black woman to be elected as a member of Parliament, in fact. Briefly served as Deputy Speaker before her retirement from politics in 2006. So it's been a while, to say the least. Fergus's election was heralded as historic by colleagues across party lines. Greg Fergus not only brings a wealth of experience to his role, he's the first black Canadian to become Speaker of the House of Commons, an inspiration to all Canadians, especially younger generations who want to get involved in politics. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, whose name I do know how to pronounce because we did pay attention to him in this country, said in a statement issued by his office, Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the new Democratic Party, said on social media, "For kids across this country who haven't seen themselves reflected in our House of Commons, this is a historic moment." Fergus's selection comes in the aftermath of an embarrassing controversy that made global headlines. I did see this, but I didn't grab it and read it or pay close attention. But anyway, and drew wide condemnation. Or in fact, I saw this and immediately forgot about it, which is why I was caught by surprise by the need for a new speaker. Last month, during a joint session of parliament addressed by Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, then Speaker Anthony Rota invited and honored Yaroslav Hunka, no idea whether I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but Hunka, who was later revealed to be a Nazi veteran. That of course, I'm sure very confusing, and likely would have confused Republicans here in this country, who specifically Trump and the Trump campaign, who very famously a couple of times in 2016 campaign, and maybe even in 2020 at some point, would put together online memes and use them as paid ads online, saying blah, 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 something about honoring the troops in America, yada, yada, and using like Nazi and or Russian troops in those photos. Anyway, Rota described the 98-year-old Hunka as a hero who fought for Ukrainian independence, prompting 2 standing ovations from lawmakers and a fist pump from Zelensky. So everybody got embarrassed by this one. The Ukrainian president is Jewish and his relatives were killed in the Holocaust. And yet the fist pump was, I didn't know he was a Nazi, but if I had known that, I wouldn't have pumped my fist. The Ukrainian political situation, a little less than stable always, but during World War II, Ukraine occupied by Germans, and weird cross currents of politics, to say the least. The Ukrainians were at that point part of the Soviet Union and unhappy about it. They had been very poorly treated, very badly mistreated by Moscow and the Russian regime, by which I mean the leadership of the Soviet Union, which, of course, that was Stalin and he was Georgian. But hey, never mind all of that. Historically at odds with rule from Moscow, and so viewed sideways, the occupation of Ukraine by German forces was an opportunity for Ukrainian nationalists to, jump on the bandwagon, which at the time hadn't yet been defeated. So Nazi Germany, bad, always was bad, but not yet at that point framed by history as the losers of the whole situation, and using their armed might to oust the Soviet regime. So if you are first and foremost anti-Soviet, you might look past the Nazism, or you might be a traditionally anti-Semitic Ukrainian who, there was a significant Jewish population there, and of course, rising anti-Semitism in Europe. One, that had always been present, and two, which was coming to political prominence and fighting a whole war all across the face of Europe and had just conquered your territory. So not only was there a ticket to being anti-Soviet, but a ticket to being openly anti-Semitic politically as well. But even if you weren't necessarily going into this whole thing anti-Semitic, you might still say, well, this gang here will give me guns to shoot Soviets, and we'll settle the question of whether we're Nazis later, but in the meantime, I'll take their guns and wear their uniforms and accept their pay, and then after the whole war is settled, maybe we throw off the Germanness of the regime, maybe we don't. And the Germans were very adept at allowing them to identify as primarily Ukrainian, so long as they towed the Nazi line. So it was not an easy swamp to navigate, to be sure. And you would now, of course, have had every reason to have spent the last 75 plus years obscuring those lines even further after the war. So anyway, that's what they did. Here they were welcoming Vladimir Zelensky. They were looking for somebody who had who was Ukrainian and who had a history of fighting for Ukrainian independence against Russian oppressors. And they found him, but they didn't read the rest of the book, in which he had teamed up with Nazis to do so. So problematic. And then I guess some question of, well, how Nazi was he? Was he a Nazi of convenience or not? And I guess not, because Jewish groups later pointed out that Hunka's, not only did he have this Nazi affiliation, not only did he just say, well, I'll team up temporarily with the Germans to fight the Soviets, but in order to do that, generally speaking, you kind of had to join units that had been thrown together that were, like I said, they allowed them to be Ukrainian forward, but they were also considered like SS affiliate units. So in order to join it, you could fake it up and say, well, I'm merely here for the Ukrainian experience, and whatever you need me to say, I'll say. And that would include, of course, adhering to the worst possible incarnation of their anti-Semitic agenda. And I'm sure there were some people who were like, awesome, I happen to also be an anti-Semite, so this is perfect. And others who said, I imagine there had to be at least some who were like, well, I'm not actually, I don't even agree with the anti-Semitism, but I am super pro-Ukrainian, and I'm going to ride this beast to Ukrainian independence. And then in the middle, there were some that said, anti-Semitism doesn't bother me a great deal, so to the extent that it's necessary to join up, fine. I'll mouth the words and maybe even come to believe it. But I wouldn't parse it too far, because you're in an awkward position. You've kept your head down for 75 years. Keep it down one more year. But there we are. Jewish groups pointed out Hunka's Nazi affiliation, saying that he had been a member of the 14th Waffen Grenadier Division, a unit of the Nazi paramilitary force Waffen SS made up of ethnic Ukrainians, which, by the way, is what provides Putin currently with the ability to sell the idea that the invasion of Ukraine is about denazifying Ukraine. Russians and former Soviets remember well that when push came to shove, Ukrainians were so independence-minded and so anti-Soviet that they were willing to join with the great enemy, Nazi Germany, to throw off rule from Moscow, whereas you might have expected them instead to, say, vote with McCarthy, so to speak, right? Some question is about, how will they do this sort of thing? Well, they could have been anti-Soviet partisans who were nonetheless not pro-Nazi, but they likely would not have gotten very far at the time, and they would have been squashed by one of the other sides, if not both. And yet, the opportunity was there for you to not be a Nazi. Rota apologized, probably didn't know any of this, and facing pressure from lawmakers over the incident, ultimately resigned, just to keep things polite there in Canada. He later said he later became aware of more information, causing him to regret his decision and acknowledge the pain his actions caused to Jewish communities. Actually, my mind is now going to the pictures of Dick Cheney. And remember, Liz Cheney is a great hero of the Republic now. Wink, wink. But Dick Cheney, wasn't he? Oh no, that was him at the cemetery service, just inappropriately dressed for the weather, but inappropriately dressed as an international diplomat. But, now I'm thinking of it. It was Reagan was it the Bitburg Cemetery, where he was making an official state visit to Germany and saying, I'll whatever, honor your traditions. Now, how do you end up saying, I'm going to honor your war dead, without realizing that's going to mean World War II and World War I, in which we were opponents in both cases. But the second one was also full of Nazis, and that's bad. But he went to a cemetery And I don't know. I'll honor your regular, normal, everyday Wehrmacht war dead, who are still our enemies. But there was a whole section there of SS war dead, and it created a big problem as though, Ronald Reagan, hey, I didn't know there was a World War II. I missed the whole thing. Of course, you were an adult and made war movies rather than actually, fought in it, whatever. Good choice, certainly, and if you have the opportunity to do that. Anyway, we have our own history with it. Trudeau also apologized for the incident, calling it a terrible mistake. He added that those present were unaware of the context and that the decision to invite Hunka was made by the Speaker's office. Canada also conveyed the apology to Ukraine and Zelensky through diplomatic channels, though Fergus did not refer to the incident in his brief remarks in the House on Tuesday. Singh called upon him to work to restore the honor of the House. Fergus's first task, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation News said, that's the CBC, said, will be to help Parliament turn the page on the embarrassing Yaroslav Hunka incident. I wonder, did it ever occur to him to say, maybe I shouldn't, be the guy here. On the other hand, he's probably forgiven himself. Who knows how much of it he remembers? Who knows how much of it he's convinced himself was all noble and the right thing to do at 98 years old. But it's an interesting chapter. So now I'm exceptionally glad to have brought this story up because it gave us a chance to address the other one, which I skipped over, the invitation of this guy and all the historical background and the problems we've had with that here in the United States as well. So, these things happen. More comments from Ricky now because this is important. Let's see. What else has she said here? Oh, wow. The whole thing, there's a whole big scandal behind the whole thing that includes the old speaker inviting a Ukrainian World War II vet to the House. Didn't realize that most Ukrainians fought on the side of the Nazis during the war. I don't know whether it was most, but it was a lot. And Ukraine has an issue historically with having aligned themselves. And it was not clear whether they were just enthusiastic anti-Semites who found the opportunity to join, or it was more about opposition to Soviet rule, or some of both. I'm sure there's every gradation in there. Let's see. She also says the conservatives made a big deal about saying Canada was now the laughing stock of the world, when my own research said that very few outside of Canada even knew what was going on. That's almost always true. And then FYI, she says the opposition leader is pronounced Polyev. Okay. So Poilivre. Polyev. I guess they dropped the in there. Polyev. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that's hard for them to figure out too. I haven't heard haven't had the time I've had a hard time trying to spell it. Okay. I do too. I thought there were two L's in there and there's only one. So anyway, hopefully I'll never have to actually spell it myself, but we'll depend on the Canadians for guidance on all that. All right, let's see. Also of some interest, some of you might find interesting, a thread on Twitter, which I, try not to read anymore, but I did get pointed to this one, a thread of right-wing media figures fighting amongst themselves over the Kevin McCarthy situation. Madeline Peltz has put this thing together. She from Media Matters for America, collecting the conflicting positions here. Let's see. Steve Bannon saying, obviously, an incredible day. I think he's pro expulsion of Kevin McCarthy. By the way, now the background, well, I've never seen his video podcast, but the background of his is a fireplace mantelpiece covered in Christian iconography. But also a framed printout of the something. I don't know whether you would call it a saying or what. There are no conspiracies, but there are no coincidences. And that, I think, is that him quoting himself? Yeah. So he put his own quote framed it and put it on the mantle next to Jesus, by the way. So there's Jesus, who said all sorts of things, and apparently there was a book written about that guy too. And then a big framing of his own quote of himself, which isn't even his originally, I'm sure. So let's see. Who else commented on this? Tomi Lahren, remember her? She actually happens to think this is grandstanding BS, but, you know, she's super conservative, so she uses the full BS word because of how conservative she is and family values and all that. Let's see. Some are attacking Representative Tom Emmer as a possible replacement. Who is this person? I don't know. Rich Barris. The People's Pundit, he calls himself. Emmer played a central role in sabotaging MAGA in 2022. Only stupid dumbasses would support going through this all over again. So he's not too happy about it. And he's taking a pot shot there at Jack Posobiec, who I guess was thrilled by the whole thing. Right-wing radio host Michael Savage was attacking Fox News, saying that MAGA wins, McCarthy loses. Fox News and other deep staters are stunned by the loss. Fox host and former Trump press secretary Kayleigh McEnany seems to think it was ill-advised. And Tim Pool, hiding in his skateboard compound in West Virginia, is excited about the whole thing. Conspiracy theorist and Fox News contributor Molly Hemingway seems to be straddling the fence on it. You can read her comments there. I'm just going to take Madeline's interpretation of these things to keep it relatively short. Anti-Muslim extremist bigot Laura Loomer says, "Victory!" in all caps and lots of exclamation points. Today is a great day for MAGA and a major blow to the Uniparty. I did hear Matt Gaetz using that terminology as well, maybe in his press conference at some point. Uniparty, that's their new thing, I guess. John McCain's daughter having a bit of a tantrum, Meghan McCain, accusing Matt Gaetz, which she spelled wrong, of tantrum having. And Hugh Hewitt, who may be poised to be an important right-wing media figure in the 2024 election, calls to expel from Congress the 8 who voted to vacate McCarthy. Everyone thinks that expulsion is just something to be handed out willy-nilly these days. Jeanine Pirro, apoplectic on Fox, probably had a couple of drinks and then belted this out. Now what we've got is total chaos when the Republicans are playing out their infighting on national television. I am furious. Let's see. And sniping at Gaetz for fundraising. Although, you know, if he's a prolific fundraiser, maybe he can replace McCarthy in that. Sean Hannity on his radio show saying, "I guarantee you Democrats are doing backflips. They're loving this. I quote Donald Trump, why?" I'm not really sure what Trump meant by that, but okay. Doug Collins, this is where the yellow brick road ends. Newsmax host Carl Higbee, this is a shot across the bow of the status quote. Whatever that's supposed to mean. Ron DeSantis' unhinged press secretary said Ben Shapiro should be speaker. Meanwhile, Ben's mad at Matt. So that's interesting too. Right-wing media now floating Trump as speaker. That was the old fantasy. Even Gaetz liked that one. I understand Murdery Trader Green is now hitching her wagon to that stupid orange giant star. And Beetlejuice, as you know, an orange giant. Or no, it's a red giant really, isn't it? But okay. Well, anyway, never mind all of that. I'm not an astronomer. Let's see. So right-wing media floating Trump as speaker. Bannon did it as well today. This idea goes back to 2021 as the GOP GOP regrouped from January 6th. Probably goes beyond that. Newt Gingrich, who wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post today calling for Gaetz to be expelled from Congress, went nuts on Sean Hannity's radio show. And they have some basis, I guess, for trying to expel Matt Gaetz in that there's, you know, ethics charges pending against him. I don't know how strong they are. But yeah, Hugh Hewitt expanding that to say, well, anybody who voted to, any Republican that voted against the speaker should be expelled. But for what crime? It's not clear whether Hewitt knows or cares or understands what the threshold is or whatever. Fox cut into McCarthy's completely unhinged press conference to interview Gaetz. Did you know that? I didn't. Genuinely, this press conference is up there with 4 seasons total landscaping, says Madeline. I'll have to watch that one. And then, well, there you go. Straight from the mouth of the world's foremost practitioner of an eclectic blend of martial arts. I'm going to bed now. She's referring to, let's see, a tweet from Media Matters saying Sean Hannity reports that Donald Trump is interested in becoming the next Speaker of the House. So we'll see whether anybody puts him forward. Obviously, you all remember your lessons that, yes, it's true that anybody can be, you don't have to be a member of the House to be Speaker of the House. Would it be extraordinarily dangerous to put him in there? Yes, absolutely. And I have seen other people commenting in the wake of, thankfully, we've read this article, having heard about the Red Caesarism ideas. This is an extraordinarily bad idea and frightening one. The idea, now you have the opportunity, and unprecedented things are happening with the speakership. I guess anything can happen, and and that might have been what Democratic opponents of joining forces with Gaetz to oust McCarthy might have brought up in the meeting. And they might say, well, you might end up, what if you end up with Donald Trump as Speaker? I don't know. It could be the worst thing ever. It could be the best thing ever. Like he could get trounced in the election, or that might force people to take up the 14th Amendment arguments well ahead of when they thought they were going to have to make them. Who knows? All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Maybe now it's time for maybe we should read the rest of that Red Caesarism article, not only as a refresher of what it was about, but to be sure that we get on the record the names of the practitioners. Maybe that will become important now as we face the uncertainty of who will take up the Speaker's role. But yeah, maybe the best thing that could come out of floating this is it gives force, or gives us a reason to revive discussions of 14th Amendment prohibitions against Trump's assuming office of any kind under the United States. That would be a fun and interesting way to put a stop to this. And I assume, though they haven't settled the question of who has standing to bring such a case, you'd make a live controversy out of it anyway if this was attempted, if they actually tried to install Trump in this office. And I also remind you of all the chaos that he could cause, some of which is already underway thanks to Patrick McHenry, who is, of course, a dirty, an old dirty bastard, basically. No offense to the original old dirty bastard, but he is getting old and he is a dirty bastard. And everyone has hated him for a long time and for good reason, and now he's moderate by comparison. So anyway, and the first thing he did, of course, was the petty sort of garbage that we would expect of Donald Trump. And maybe this is McHenry's bid to win the post on a permanent basis. Yes, you could install Donald Trump here, but he wouldn't know what he was doing and would be chaotic. I'll know something about what I'm doing and be just as chaotic and unpredictable and mean. For instance, here's me kicking both Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer out of the offices that the Democrats requested, and I guess McCarthy granted, to allow them to retire from their leadership posts with some extra dignity so that they can serve out their days as regular members, supposedly backbenchers now. But whatever, there's some extra perks for them. There's really, honestly, it's not such a big deal. There's really no reason for them to have those offices. So you shouldn't be too terribly offended. It's a mean, nasty thing to do, and beneath the dignity of the office it's supposed to be being filled here. But ultimately, they weren't doing anything with those offices that are essential to the function of government. And, if you're a minimalist, maybe you keep it, you're okay with it. Anyway, so back to this Red Caesarism idea. This was the Guardian article that both, who else recommended it? Let's see, I can skim back, but I think Rosalind and John Shiflett both sent links to this article. And we read the beginning of it just to recap, and then skip down to where we left off because we ran out of time last time. Red Caesarism is right-wing code, and some Republicans are listening. We were informed by Jason Wilson, writing at The Guardian. Argument for a Red Caesar. to rule the U.S. may seem esoteric, but conservative think tank behind the idea has connections to Trump. We found out it was the Claremont Institute, which is where John Eastman makes his home before he makes it in prison. And that, let's see, it's been proposed both by, who is this? Why is the original proponent's name not here? Slack, it says here, except it looks like they edited out his first mention or something, so we don't know what his first name is. Slack, a politics professor at the conservative Hillsdale College in Michigan, made a conspiracy. It said he was the one that launched this thing. And I gotta go back to the beginning. In June, the right-wing academic published it. They must have edited out the first paragraph here. That's weird. In June, is it in the original Pocket version? Yes, it is. In June, right-wing academic Kevin Slack published a book-length polemic claiming that ideas that had emerged from what he called the radical left were now so dominant that the U.S. Republic and its founders envisioned was effectively at an end. There we are. And then Slack, a politics professor at Hillsdale College, which is barely a college, but is in Michigan, which is why it came to Rosalind's, or presumably why it came so quickly to Rosalind's attention, and everyone remembers Hillsdale College, right? The model for the revamping of New College in Florida under Ron DeSantis and Chris Ruvo's regime down in Florida, attempting to turn New College into a Southern Hillsdale College. And by the way, I understand I saw yesterday and might have to track down whatever the helling it is on Blue Sky, re-skeeting of it. But somebody said that they had fired, I don't know who, maybe the spokesperson for the college after like 2 months on the job because they weren't being aggressive enough in seeking out and attacking foes of the DeSantis regime or something like that was really the job of this spokesperson. See if I can't uncover it because it really was kind of interesting, but I didn't park it in Pocket. It was a while back. Anyway, I'll keep looking for it, but dang, or maybe I'll have to end up looking for it after the show is over, but I'll never remember this. Anyway, the Red Caesarism article is really what we're focusing on here. So Slack at Hillsdale wrote a book about this whole thing, and in discussion of possible responses comes up with this idea of a red, as in Republican, Caesar, a capital R Republican, the Republican Party, Red Caesar, MAGA Caesar, which means a leader whose post-constitutional rule will restore the strength of his people, overthrowing the republic and turning it into something like a monarchy instead. What a great idea. Except this is hilarious, of course, if it wasn't so scary, for the ideas coming out of the originalist school of the Constitution, right? We're getting back to our founding documents by overthrowing the republic and replacing it with a monarchy. Gosh, that seems to be almost in direct opposition to the, black letter intent of both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Although they would argue, well, there's nothing that's nothing anti-independence about naming our own monarch. And in fact, it was a big question mark after the Declaration of Independence, but before the establishment of the Republic, whether we might just establish our own American monarchy here. But then the Constitution sort of supposedly answered that question. Anyway, for the last 3 years, parts of the American right have advocated a theory called Caesarism as an authoritarian solution to the claimed collapse of the U.S. Republic in conference rooms, podcasts, and the House organs of the extreme right, especially those associated with the Claremont Institute. Though on the surface this discussion might seem esoteric, experts who track extremism in the U.S. say that due to their influence on the Republican Party, the right-wing intellectuals who espouse these ideas about the attractions of autocracy present a profound threat to American democracy. And if they're also now teaming up with people who say, let's make Donald Trump Speaker of the House and then impeach Joe Biden and then impeach Kamala Harris and make the third-ranking constitutional officer, the Speaker of the House, into the president, well, then you can see why that would be some sort of a problem, right? And, wow. Okay, let's see. Their calls for a red Caesar are now only growing louder as Donald Trump, whose supporters attempted to violently halt the election of Joe Biden in 2020, has assumed dominant frontrunner status in the 2024 nomination race. Trump, who also faces multiple criminal indictments, has spoken openly of attacking the free press in the U.S. and having little regard for American constitutional norms should he win the White House again or be awarded this office. He would almost certainly impose chaotic decisions like dispossessing Nancy Pelosi of her office. I always have thrown out the idea that he would simply not extend any invitation to Joe Biden to give the State of the Union address, though that's counterable. But he would do these sorts of things that were assumed, just basic automatic functions of the office, and that he would abandon these things in ways that he could use politically. Anyway, so the idea that the U.S. might be redeemed by a Caesar, an authoritarian right-wing leader, was first broached explicitly by Michael Anton, a Claremont senior fellow and Trump presidential advisor. Anton had been an influential right-wing intellectual since 2016, penning the Flight 93 election. I thought in rather poor taste, right? A right-wing essay in which he told conservatives who were squeamish about Trump, "Charge the cockpit or you die," referencing one of the hijacked flights of 9/11. He gave Caesarism a passing mention in the essay, but developed it further in his 2020 book, The Stakes, defining it as a form of one-man rule, halfway between monarchy and tyranny, which is really not a good position to be in. We're not monarchists, and we're also supposed to be anti-tyranny, and of course, he says we have to overthrow tyranny by adopting a new and different kind of tyranny. Overthrow their tyranny by adopting my gimme-tarian tyranny. The Guardian contacted Anton at his Claremont Institute email address, received no response. Anton and others in the Claremont milieu are not simply hypothesizing about the future. Their dreams of Caesar arise from their dark view of the U.S. Remember, they think it's a hellhole. Republicans campaign on the idea that the U.S. is a hellhole. Anton wrote the scene-setting essay in Up From Conservatism, an anthology of essays published this year and edited by the executive director of Claremont's Center for the American Way of Life, which is an anomaly, or an extraordinarily weird way of representing a think tank that says we should overthrow the Constitution and adopt a new Caesar somewhere between tyranny and monarchy, because that doesn't feel like the American way of life at all. What they mean, of course, is the American way of social ordering, which I guess they don't care how it's imposed. They just want to impose it on people. We want everyone to be running around in Norman Rockwell paintings, except for the one where somebody stands up and dissents. We don't like that one. We want them running around in Thomas Kincaid paintings more than anything else. I don't know if there's any people in there, just Christmas trees and cottages as far as I know. But inside, there are presumably conservative people who aren't transgender. There you go. That's what they're looking for. So this whole thing, Up From Conservatism, was edited by executive director of Claremont's Center for the Non-American Way of Life, Arthur Milikh, Milikh. No idea how he pronounces that, but if he really wanted to be American, he would change it to Miller. In that essay, Anton writes baldly that the United States peaked around 1965, really even pre-Rockwell, or post-Rockwell, actually, and that Americans are ruled by a network of unelected bureaucrats, corporate tech finance, senior management experts who set the boundaries of acceptable opinion, and media figures who police those boundaries. And, but not them. They're exempt from all of that. They're just getting paid to think in a think tank and drive around in expensive cars. His diagnosis of U.S. social and cultural life unfolds under a series of subheadings that are almost comical in their disillusionment. The universities have become evil. Our economy is fake. The people are corrupt. Wow. Our civilization has lost the will to live. Our civilization has lost the will to let you live, but, I'm in agreement. Damon Linker, a senior lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania and an author of several books on the American right, was early in noticing the extreme right's drift toward Caesarism. Linker told The Guardian that Anton and others in the Claremont milieu, used twice, have convinced themselves thoroughly that the current order is decadent, corrupt, and far removed from the proper admirable origins of American government. That is as Soviet a statement as I've ever heard. But remember, these are anti-Soviet, anti-communist conservatives, and also anti-tyranny conservatives who want essentially a gimmitarian dictatorship. Linker said their current view is related to a long-held position among Claremont scholars that democracy as they understand it has been supplanted by bureaucrats and entrenched executive branch departments. The fact that Trump lost in 2020 has just radicalized a lot of these people. It occurred to them that they might not win a proper election again, he said. That would mean that, excuse the language, we'll use the abbreviation for it, SOL. S out of luck, right? Okay, wink, wink, because we're Norman Rockwell Americans. Before 1965, nobody said these words. They're SOL unless there's some other path to power. Well, there is revolution and insurgency. That's where Caesarism comes in. Linker said that the danger in such ideas is not that the American people will actively choose a dictatorship, but more in how they might shape the right-wing response to a future emergency. If Trump wins in 2024, what does the opposition do, and how does he respond? Linker speculated. Does he send in the troops? Does that lead to bigger protests? And if he then declares martial law, because there are bigger protests, or because he just feels like it, do these ideas prepare people in the Republican Party to say, well, we need law and order? Linker asked. Does Trump then listen to people like Michael Anton and his friends about the need to perhaps, let's say, cancel the next election? Underlining this danger is the fact that Caesarism has won converts beyond Claremont as a solution to perceived decadence and the declining electoral appeal of far-right ideas. Charles Haywood, a former industrialist The Guardian exposed last month, linked here, as the founder of a secretive fraternal lodge and would-be warlord. Wow. What is this, by the way? Yeah, look at that. I'm going to have to read about that one. What's his secret society? The Society for American Civic Renewal. I mean, harmless sounding, except he means civic renewal by murdering his opposition, I guess. Well, exposed as a secretive fraternal lodge and would-be warlord. I'm glad they're using the word. Wrote in 2021 that, quote, I like, if not love, the idea of a red Caesar, since Caesarism and its time-legitimized successor, monarchy, is a natural realism-based system under which a civilization can flourish. It, mostly led to the Dark Ages, but whatever. I mean, I guess there was monarchy during the Enlightenment as well, and they would point at that instead. But the bulk of the time under this time-honored system that existed from the days of the original Caesars through up until the Enlightenment was all monarchist as well, and it wasn't great, let's say, in terms of advancement or flourishing of civilization. There was a brief flourish of civilization during the Renaissance period, and it continued afterwards, but I guess a brief period during which you could say monarchs reigned while this was happening, but it was also all about the eventual enlightenment that prompted society to replace absolute monarchy with at least modified versions of it, if not throwing it off completely. But, don't worry about history. It doesn't matter. You just make it up as you go along from their point of view. So how do you like that? So, and I think I emphasized things incorrectly. I think Haywood was saying, I like, if not love, the idea of Red Caesar. Not that he was, I like, if not love. There's different nuance to that. Like, I'll take it. It's okay. I don't love it, but I'll take it. Here he's actually probably saying, I like it. I might even more than like it. I might love it. Anyway, the idea has been lodged in the broader sphere of conservative debate in the right wing since Stephen Wolfe's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, in which he proposes a Christian prince whose rule would be a measured and theocratic Caesarism and might perhaps be installed by a just revolution against secular rule. I think maybe at this point I do want to throw out the possibility that the way traditionally, historically, we've had to rid ourselves of this type of Christian principality has been their beheading. I don't want to advocate for another rash of beheadings. You never know when things are going to get out of control. But that's been the way we've generally had to draw the line with these guys. Sometimes they take hints, sometimes they don't. But heads literally rolled as a result of resort to this sort of methodology in governance. Caesarism and other anti-democratic ideas bemuse many observers, including some with whom they might otherwise share common ground. What do you know? Thomas Merrill, for instance, is a political theorist and associate professor at American University in Washington, D.C., who has written critically on the Claremont Institute, but from a broadly conservative perspective. We're cousins, he said of Claremont intellectuals in a telephone conversation, and sometimes you have to ask your cousin, what the hell are you doing? He said that the authoritarian drift exhibited in work like Anton's was an example of the Claremont guys shooting themselves in the foot, which is something they could do rather than cut their own heads off. For Merrill, while he agrees that the ideas are dangerous, he thinks they have an air of compensatory fantasy. They're selling a very dark picture of the world to conservative donors without going out and doing the hard work of democratic politics. That's a good point. For Linker, the author and lecturer, a far-right dictatorship means a tail-end worst-case scenario, but one that is more realistic in the U.S. now than it has been for many decades. 30 years ago, if I told you a bunch of billionaires and intellectuals on the right are waiting in the wings to impose a dictatorship on the United States, you would have said that I was insane, or that you were Smedley Butler. But, okay, whatever. But it's no longer insane. It's now real. And there are these people out there, Linker added, and you're helping them and leading them on. The question is, will they get their chance? So, I don't know. I once again, these lunatics sort of think they're the first in time on all of this stuff, even though they're borrowing their ideas from ancient Rome, and yet somehow think that they've invented this thing. But no, it's been invented before. We've dealt with it in the past. We managed to do it without executing anybody, defeating it in its infancy, I guess, in the rich oligarchical reaction to the New Deal. But prior to that, in other countries, yes, they've had to either stab the actual Caesar to death in the Senate or behead their the monarchs, as they did in some cases in England, or their entire aristocracy, as they did in France. I don't know that the record's that great. So, but, they don't really care for the actual particulars of history. Okay. Well, I just wanted to sort of throw that out there because people have brought it up now that they are out and endorsing the idea of Donald Trump as Speaker of the House. You should know exactly how dangerous that actually is and what sorts of problems it poses. All right, let's see. A couple of other things that, I don't know, maybe we'll throw this one out there too. I was sort of thinking maybe this was a Friday thing, but let's throw it in there just for the hell of it. In the last few minutes, a piece from, well, it's from the Democracy Docket, which is usually where, what's his name? I'm blanking on his name because his name isn't on the byline here, but that Mark Elias's operation, the election lawyer, always these days engaged in litigation against Republican plots to deny people the right to vote or otherwise rig elections in their favor. But this time written by Jessica Pishko at Democracy Docket, pointing out these sheriffs, remember the sheriffs, the crazy sheriffs out there, are refusing to enforce state law. Another rash of these idiots out there. And it's of interest to me because it's now of interest to the Democracy Docket folks, which it's always been, but they're calling it to our attention means action might be taken at some point in the future. Earlier this month, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, a Democrat, in case you didn't know, suspended the open and concealed carry of firearms in Albuquerque for 30 days. I don't think I was personally aware of this. This temporary measure, she said, was in response to the public health problem of increased gun violence in the city, including the shooting death of an 11-year-old. Pushing the envelope. I can appreciate that. Anyway, almost immediately, gun rights groups decried the move, and Sheriff John Allen of Bernalillo County, do they say Bernalillo, perhaps, as they anglicize it, I don't know, alongside the Albuquerque police chief, made a public statement explaining that his office would not enforce the governor's order because of the potential for civil liberty conflicts and the concern that enforcing a gun restriction would lead to more violence somehow. The New Mexico Sheriff's Association also issued a statement opposing the ban. Other sheriffs jumped on board. The Arizona Sheriff's Association president, David Rhodes, remember, different state, Arizona, who was a sheriff fellow at the insurrection-supporting Claremont Institute, in case you were wondering where I was going with this, issued a statement decrying the full-blown violation of constitutional rights. But don't say that because it could affect the outcome of an election, New York Times. The Western States Sheriff's Association, or WSSA, they're putting the SS back in WSSA, which represents sheriffs in the western United States, described the Second Amendment as an individual's right to self-preservation. That's a little broader. And argued that no matter the outcome or policy intent, Grisham's order was an unconstitutional assault on individual liberty. The letter quotes Benjamin Franklin, an interesting figure in all of this. Those who would sacrifice essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. Not exactly what he was necessarily talking about at the time. But remember, Benjamin Franklin also said that since now Republicans have rendered impeachment ineffectual by ignoring everything and saving Donald Trump's skin twice, I remind you that Benjamin Franklin said, well, that was the provision for impeachment was in the Constitution to save us the trouble of doing this work by assassination, essentially. So I think he was quite wise. You want to avoid having to do things that way. The president of the WSSA is Lee County, New Mexico Sheriff Corey Helton, I'm guessing Lee, L-E-A County. In December of 2022, Helton appeared with 3 other Republican New Mexico sheriffs stumping for the GOP candidate for governor and critiquing Grisham's soft-on-crime approach. Helton now faces removal from the State Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission for political bias. How do you like that? Richard Mack, president and founder of the far-right group Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, you know about them, and other constitutional sheriffs call this tactic nullification, or the act of invalidating federal or state law by ignoring it. While none of these sheriffs cite Mack as inspiration, the WSSA representative I spoke with was clear that their response was unrelated to Mack or the CSPOA. Mack has claimed this political situation as a victory. In an email to me, he described these nullification statements by sheriffs as vindication for me and the CSPOA. even though they don't see it that way. Anyway, I'll just add this additional bit while we read our way out of here. Sheriffs who support nullification, especially for gun regulations, want you to believe that the tactic is historically sound and used by both left-wing and right-wing radicals, citing examples like marijuana decriminalization or discretionary immigration enforcement by local law enforcement. This is all a misdirect and distracts from the historical and legal context in which right-wing sheriffs like Mac make their arguments. The truth is that the fantastical idea of nullifying gun regulations, despite any beneficial policy outcomes, is deeply rooted in far-right resistance to recognizing black Americans as full citizens. Those of you who are students of history will remember the old nullification arguments. There's lots more to it, of course. Just wanted to sort of put this on the record, especially since, as it turns out, it mentions the Claremont Institute. So it's kind of a follow-up to our revisiting of Red Caesarism. Okay, time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's see what he's got on tap for this exciting day today, starting off in his Bistro Cafe. The MAGA House, of course, cares more about making headlines than headway. On the rest of the menu, the FBI alleges a diehard MAGA sheriff, a sheriff, what? In Virginia this time, charged with accepting bribes for deputy badges, sold one to a controversial Iraqi fixer. That seems weird. It seems like the sort of thing they would not normally want to get involved in.
NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
Elsewhere, neo-Nazis violently threatened journalists covering a Tennessee mayoral race, and back in Virginia, the Education Department asserts Liberty University violated federal safety laws by failing to warn the campus community about gas leaks, bomb threats, and people credibly accused of repeated acts of sexual violence for years. Stay tuned.